Hello and welcome to the Motorboat and Yachting channel. I'm Jack Haynes, Deputy Editor of Motorboat and Yachting, and I'm joined by Hugo Andre, Editor of Motorboat and Yachting, and Nick Burnham, Contributor to Motorboat and Yachting, but also the man behind the Aquaholic YouTube channel. Gentlemen, welcome. How are you both?
All right, thank you. Good to see you.
Very splendid.
Good. Well, I think we were all quite surprised at how well received the last one of these videos was. As squabbling about which 30 to 35 foot sports boat we'd choose, and it generated quite a few comments and quite a lot of debate within those comments, and we were encouraged to do more. It's taken us a little while, but thankfully we're here with a new challenge from Hugo, which we'll get into in a minute. But I think before that, it's been a challenging year to use an understatement. But I think it'd be nice to maybe look back at some of our boating highlights, whether it's personal or professional. I think it'd be interesting to hear what you've enjoyed doing most this year, despite the restrictions and the lockdown. So Nick, should we start with you?
Well, yeah, thank you. I suppose one of each. Professionally, I think the highlight for me this year, and I think I just got away with it before the lockdown business started, was the Miami Boat Show. And it was the first time I've been to the Miami show, and it was the first time I'd taken Aquaholic to America. And it was just brilliant. I had such a good time out there. And also I'm a massive Miami Vice fan. And I'd always promised myself that one day I would visit Miami. So I took an extra day and spent a day going around looking at all the filming spots of Miami Vice, which was a bit of fun and something I'd always wanted to do. So that was a bit of a highlight. And as I say, literally while I was out there, they were just starting to talk about this virus and how it was sort of starting to spread, and flew back at the end of February, and then of course it all kicked off. So I think I was very lucky to have just about got away with that one. But I think from a personal perspective, and there's no getting away from this virus thing, unfortunately, it's so all pervading, but I think just the ability to have had the opportunity to escape and to get down to the boat and get away from the madness for a day or a weekend or whatever it might be. And didn't use the boat anything like as much because of the lockdown, and because of also I went to Mallorca in the summer again for Aquaholic, but had to quarantine for 2 weeks when I got back. So for lots of reasons the boat got half the use it normally did, but somehow it was twice as worth it, because just to be able to get away and go and anchor in a nice bay somewhere and forget all about it for a few hours, or spend a weekend on the boat, was extra blissful this year.
Yeah, and you know what, in all the years I've known you, I never knew you were a Miami Vice fan. You've kept that really quiet. Thank you for revealing that exclusive here on this video.
It's Hugo, very sad, I know.
No, it's great. Hugo, what about you? What have you enjoyed boating-wise this year?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with Nick in as far as it was just such a joy to get out on a boat at all come the summer. And for those little periods of time, it just felt like an escape from the reality of the world. So I'm with him on just any kind of boating felt extra special this year. But in terms of personal highlights, I personally didn't travel at all overseas. So all my boating has been UK based, other than right at the beginning of the year, the Düsseldorf show. And for me, the standout boats were this new breed of sports boat that is coming along. It was kicked off by Axopar a few years back, and now people seem to be piling on the bandwagon with ever more exciting variants. So it's things like the Nimbus T8 that I see trial for the magazine, terrific all-rounder. The little Hydrolift SUV, just such a unexpected boat, to have a slightly quirky looking asymmetric pilot house boat that'll do 50 knots with a 300 horsepower engine on the back. You've got to admire that kind of ingenuity. And then there was that brilliant little Saxdor 200, which is just so nice to see a completely different looking boat coming into the market with prices starting at 25 grand that you can get out and have a whole load of fun on. So for me, it's always new products and innovation that get me excited. And those three boats all absolutely personified that for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, talking of the Saxdor, me and you tested those boats together. There's a video of that which I'll put in the description. But I also had one of those boats for a week. They gave us one for a bit of a longer term test with a 175 horsepower engine on it. And that video of my experience with it over a slightly longer period will be going live soon. So look out for that one, because it's quite interesting having lived with it a bit more than just what we had on the test. And I suppose looking forward to 2021, hopefully will be a better year all round. What are you looking forward to next year? And any particular boats you've got your eye on, any trips you have planned, shows, etc.? What's exciting you about 2021?
for me, I would really like to have my first proper sea trial of an electric boat. You know, it now looks like there are some really genuine contenders out there in the market, and some really exciting and innovative ones as well. Like the Candela foiler just seems such an out there idea, but they've delivered it. It's not a crazy price. It looks like it works. It's got automated foils that lift it up above the water, all computer controlled, so it takes any of the sort of difficulty and risk that you might associate with a foiling boat out of the equation, and looks like finally you can get a decent range and decent performance from an electric boat. So I'm really hoping that we can get out, test that in a proper situation, really verify that range and that performance, and hopefully prove that electric boats are here to stay.
Yeah, well, you know, the spotlight is being on cars, and, you know, petrol diesel cars being phased out slowly, and you know, it's inevitable that that will come the way of boats at some point, whenever that may be. So I'm hoping we're going to see a huge push towards electric, and I think the innovation that this industry can bring towards that goal will be fascinating to see, and the Candela is a great start. Nick, how about you? 2021, what are you looking forward to?
Traveling again, if we're able to travel again easily, because that's just such a challenge at the moment. And super yachts, because super yachts is a big part of Aquaholic. I've already had Golfcraft. They've just, well, in the process of launching their Majesty 175, and the best or the most popular video on Aquaholic is their Majesty 140, which has had almost 3 million views. So they've already been in touch and said, look, we'd love to have you down and do a tour of this, which I'm really, really excited about. And also America, getting back to America. When I went to America back in February, I met some people, made some good contacts, and had a lot of plans for America. I could see myself getting out there sort of, you know, once every couple of months. And of course, the whole thing got completely kiboshed. So the idea of being able to get back out there and do a lot of the stuff that I had planned, again, with super yachts and that kind of thing, is very, very exciting. But how realistic that's going to be, that remains to be seen. So it's absolutely fingers crossed at this end.
Yeah. Sure. Well, yes, fingers crossed, absolutely. And for me personally, last year there is one standout test from a professional point of view, and that has to be the Spirit P70. I'll put the link to the video in the description as well. But it really is a special boat. For those who don't know about Spirit, they are, you know, they build beautiful wooden yachts generally. In the east of England, and they turned their hand to this amazing motor yacht. It wasn't their first motor yacht, but this was a very specific brief, a boat that needed to go 1,000 nautical miles at 18 knots without stopping. And they sort of had that technical brief, and then they've just built this stunning all wooden boat around it. And taking that thing out of Hamble Point Marina on a sunny August day will stick in my memory for a long time. So yeah, be sure to check that video out if you haven't seen it. And as for next year, for me, it's two ends of the spectrum, really. I'm really looking forward to seeing Axopal's 22. That's launching very shortly, the smallest boat that they've ever produced. And hopefully they'll have distilled all that's good about the bigger boats they built into a little 22-foot, sort of 45,000 euro package. Could be really compelling little thing. And then at the other end of the scale is Sunseeker's Ocean 90, which really looks very, very interesting. Genuine, brand new product from Sunseeker. A different direction for them, but they're always at their best when they're being as innovative as this boat looks. So I'm really interested to see that thing in the flesh. So that's a recap and a look forward. But let's get on to the subject of this video, which is that Hugo has given us some more fictional money. We've got £100,000 each to spend in the brokerage ads. We've been trawling the internet to see what we could find. It was only a budget challenge. There was no particular star we had to pick, but we got a first choice and we've got a wild card each. So we'll run through them now. And Nick, would you like to kick us off with your first choice, with your fictional £100,000?
Well, I've always said that my next step, if and when I could afford it, would be a 40-foot twin diesel sports cruiser. I've got a 26-footer single engine at the moment, and that would just really extend our range, both in terms of having the twin engines, but also the seakeeping of a 40-foot boat, which turns it into, I mean, my boat would go across the channel, but you'd have to really pick your weather. Whereas with a 40-foot boat, you're going to be a little bit less concerned about getting back again. You know, you're going to know that if it blows up to maybe a force 4 or 5, you can still do it. It's a proper offshore boat. So with that brief, I mean, I've always sort of felt that something like a Fairline Targa 38 is very much where I would like to be. Hugo typically hasn't come up with enough money, so I can't afford a Targa 38 with that budget. But what is very interesting, I think, is the Cranchi 41 Endurance, because it's a 40-foot sports cruiser. You can get one of around 2006 for 100,000, and that's quite a critical year, because that's when the D series engines came out. So you move up from the KAD engines that were typically fitted to things like the earlier boats like the Targa 34 and the Princess V40 and that kind of thing, of the sort of the late 90s, early 2000s. You move up from those KAD engines into the modern D series engines, which are quite a big step, because those KADs, they date right back. You know, the KAD 300 was evolution of the 44, evolution of the 42, and that came from the original TAMD 41 that was fitted in boats in the 80s. So it's a very well proven and a very good engine, but the D series moves the game on. So I think the combination of being able to get a 40-foot boat and those D series engines, you'd also get the horsepower, because the D series, the D6s, 310 horsepower typically in those boats, are giving you some serious performance, and that makes a nice package. Now, what it lacks is the forward cabin that the Targa has, and I think that's what holds the price back a little bit, because people look at it as a one cabin boat. But for me, that's the layout I have on my boat, and that works well, because we've only ever had more than two of us on the boat sleeping, I think, once in the 3 years that we've had the boat. The rest of the time it's just me and Marianne. And so to have that one cabin at the back and then a much larger dinette as a result actually works for us really, really well. So that's a boat. Actually, it's a little bit left of field. The obvious choice is the Targa, if you can stretch the budget, or a Princess V40 or the Princess V42. I'm talking about the earlier ones, the sort of early 2000 boats. All lovely boats. But at that price point, at 100,000, I think that Cranchi hits quite a sweet spot of being relatively new. You're talking about a boat that's well into this century, has the D series engines, has the performance, has the looks, and has the space.
It's a decent hull, that Cranky too, isn't it? I mean, isn't that an evolution of the 39, which is almost kind of legendary boat for its seakeeping, wasn't it?
Very much so. See, with that boat, what's interesting is they've gone very much for a sort of performance boat. It's almost along the lines of the sort of Superhawk range, in that they've said, let's not try and get too much into it. It's interesting that if you look at the Cranchi 34 Zafiro, which is very much more of a cruiser style of sports cruiser, that is a two cabin boat. So they've gone from saying, okay, we've got a two cabin boat at 34 foot, but at 40 foot, we're going to have a one cabin boat and focus more on the sort of the hull shape and getting it really narrow at the front and all the things that you can't do if you're trying to get a forward cabin in. So you're right, the hull on that is a really good hull. And yeah, I think it's a very left of field choice. It's not the most obvious way to go with a 40-foot sports cruiser, but there's a lot about that boat to like.
There is, and I think it probably was held back a little bit at the time because of not having the separate forward cabin. But I think there's something about Cranky that maybe if you're not familiar with the brand, you wouldn't know, is how well built those boats are, what experienced boat builders they are, and the practical detailing is really good. You know, it's a really slick looking boat, the 40, but they do things properly, and they're boats that feel like they're being built by people who know how to build boats, who use them and go to sea. And I don't think the 40 is any different. Not that I've tested it, but I've been on board and I was really impressed with how it all fitted together as a boat, not just a piece of design.
I've taken one out and they are a great boat to drive. I think the only criticism that I do have of them, to be completely fair about it, is they've got a tender gouge on them, which is great. It's ideal to be able to put your tender away and keep it inflated, but it does leave quite a small cockpit. I don't think the actual seating area in that cockpit is any bigger than it is in my Genoa, which is a much smaller boat. So that's where they are compromised by having the tender gouge. And if you look at, for example, a Princess V40 or 42 or a Targa 38, they've got a much, much bigger cockpit area. So that's the only downside to them.
Not quite the only. I mean, they're not really quite as well finished as some of the British boats of that size. I mean, there's quite a lot of bare GRP inside, and some of that styling that was quite modern and funky at the time, looking a little bit dated now.
I think that's fair, but I think that's reflected very much in the price. I mean, it's all very well saying, well, there's, that boat over there is a better boat, but if you can't afford it, it's kind of irrelevant, and that's the problem. I think, as I say, with an unlimited budget, I think that Targa 38 would come very sharply back into focus, but your meager budget won't allow me to reach it. So,
look, before you start moaning, can we wait and see what other boats? Because it's perfectly possible to get a good quality well built, beautifully styled, even better performing boat for exactly that money. In fact, slightly less in the case of the one I found.
I can't help feeling this is a nice
Yeah,
segue into what you've chosen, Hugo.
I feel a segue coming on. Yeah,
absolutely.
Hugo,
Well,
what have you picked?
Only because, as ever, Nick, a sensible chap, and perfectly decent choice. I don't like to knock other people's, but nevertheless, surely the way to spend that money is a Windy Camzin 34. Similar idea in terms of it's a performance-oriented boat. It's a nice slender hull. Admittedly, it has got the slightly older 300 horsepower CAD engines, but even more performance. Fantastic hull, unbelievable Scandinavian build quality, and really in that era, I think Windy are probably the yard that everyone looks up to. Their hulls are so solid, so efficient, so fast, and they're just beautifully finished inside and out. All the detailing from the stainless steel work, the woodwork, the cockpit upholstery, everything about them has a kind of timeless quality feel that really does stand the test of time. I would say rather better than perhaps the Cranky.
What year would that be? What year would that get you?
2003, I found one for sale for £88,500.
Yeah, this is the thing. You're very, very quickly into a 20-year-old boat there. A couple of years' time, you buy that. A couple of years' time, you're boating a 20-year-old boat.
Yeah, but it's only 3 years older than yours, Nick. Really, 3 years, when you're talking 20 years, is kind of neither here nor there, and it certainly doesn't look any older than yours, I would say.
I guess it is a lovely boat. I grant you that. It is a genuinely lovely boat. And when I bought my current boat, I actually went out with the budget that I had then with the thought of I really want a Windy, and I wanted a Ghibli and couldn't quite stretch to it. And I looked at a Mirage, which I could afford, but it just didn't have the space. And that's the compromise that you get with the Windy. You're absolutely right. They're a beautiful, beautiful machine. But there's always a trade-off with these things, and the trade-off with that boat is you're just getting a lot less boat, and that's fine if you don't need as much space. But if you do want that extra space, the extra length that sea keeping grants you, and all of those kinds of things, then that's your trade-off for it.
You still ultimately get an open forward cabin and the separate stern cabin. Probably Absolutely. Not quite as spacious, I'll admit, but
that's exactly it.
The same essential layout.
You're going to know you're on a smaller boat. Put it this way: if you owned the Cranky 40, or 41 rather, I think, isn't it? If you own the Cranky 41, you're not going to want to step backwards into a 34-footer, I don't think. So it depends. I mean, if ultimately, if all you want is a sort of circa 30-foot boat, then it's a brilliant choice. I agree with you, but I just think that 40-foot is a real sweet spot in terms of manageability and in terms.
Not all about the size, Nick, as you well know.
as a lady once said to me, it's not the size, it's what you do with it, and it's the size.
Oh, steady on. The other thing I found out is, of course, the efficiency you get with a slightly smaller, lighter boat. You not only get better performance. I had a little look up, actually, the original motorboat and yachting test. With those 285 horsepower CAD 300s, it was doing 43 knots flat out, but also 2.97 mpg, which means you get a range of 360 nautical miles from that 700-litre fuel tank. So it's genuinely impressive, both in terms of performance and efficiency. And ultimately, you still get a smaller accommodation, but still the same number of berths.
It says a lot about how Windy see their boats being used, and it's telling that they're still essentially building that boat as the 37 Shamal today. It does exactly the same sort of thing. It's just the completely modern version. But I so nearly picked a 34 Camzin because it just jumped into my head immediately when you gave us this budget, Hugo. And having seen them, growing up in Poole, they were a couple in our Marino, and I just thought they were the perfect blueprint for a sports boat. And then I joined the magazine and tested one in 2011, actually as the 35 Camzin, when we were doing our Thinking Man sports boat features. And that sums it up perfectly, really. And it really didn't disappoint. It's one of those boats that can do 50 knots, but can cruise at sort of 35 to 40 knots, 45 knots, absolutely no problem as well. It gives you a hell of a lot of performance. And, as a pointer, it's pretty hard to beat in that size range. But yes, you do pay for it a little bit in terms of living space, but that tends to be the way.
So what would your choice be?
Well, having not picked the 34 Camzin, my eye was caught by a bit of a rare beast, which is the Sunseeker Sportsfisher 37, which was Sunseeker's attempt, I guess, to take on the well-known sports fisher brands in the US. This was sort of built for my time before I worked in the industry. So I was reading about this boat in MBY. In fact, I think MBY used to run one. Is that right?
We did. I went fishing on one just to demonstrate that it is technically possible to cast a rod from one.
How did it do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure they were really made to make sports fishers. It feels a bit like Rolls-Royce trying to design an American pickup or something. I mean, technically it's possible, and it kind of looks cool in its own way, but I'm just not sure it was ever really up their street. That.
Well, to be honest, at the time, you think about sort of, what they were doing then, it does seem very out of character, but the boat itself feels a bit ahead of its time. If we look back at it from where we are now, the style of boat that is, what people are looking for today, it ticks so many of those boxes. First of all, it was available with outboards. You have it with triple 250 horsepower Yamaha outboards, where I think it would do almost 50 knots. And then there were two stern drive options as well. You could have the CAD 300s with that as well, the 285s, which they said would do 40 knots, but I don't imagine it did do that. Can you remember what engines the magazine one had, Hugo?
I'm ashamed to say I can't. I do remember it being quite a wet, exposed boat.
Yeah.
It had a very low windscreen.
Yes.
And I don't think it had quite as much flair as their sort of traditional designs, or maybe you were just more exposed in the cockpit. But it was a very rare beast. I don't think they sold a huge number of them.
Possibly no, there aren't many around. But I like that as well. That's why it caught my eye. And if you have it with the stern drives, because there's a D6 310 option as well, which will do sort of 43 knots, I think. That would be a really nice match for that boat. And that hull, it was a twin stepped hull with a 20-degree dead rise. And it was actually Dag Pike who tested the boat for Motorboat and Yachting, and he's a man who knows a thing or two about offshore hulls. And I'm going to quote his test, because he said, "Only aboard high performance racing craft have I felt as comfortable behind the wheel or as in touch with the boat." And it sounds like he really enjoyed driving it, and it didn't sound like a wet ride at all from what he said in his test. Obviously the setups might have been different between the test boat and the one that MBY had on a longer term loan, but I was pleasantly surprised by how much he enjoyed the boat from a driver's perspective. And going back to what it offers sort of in today's world, you've got a huge open cockpit that people are really into these days, because you can prep for water sports really easy. Obviously, it's pretty good for fishing as well. And it's got this neat setup where you've got the sports fisher style helm, which is very upright, but according to Dag, a fantastic driving position, really well thought out and ergonomically really sweet and well protected. And then they put the seating area in front of that with a wet bar opposite. So that was protected by the windscreen, which is obviously a long way from the helm, but good for protecting those passengers. And it means that the skipper can sort of see everybody's socializing, and he's sort of still in the action rather than just sort of turn around and see what everybody's doing in the cockpit. And then the key thing I think about this boat is it was finished inside to Sunseeker's usual high standard. So there's cherry wood all over the place. You have a double bed, you have a separate bathroom. It's only got one cabin, and that's open plan. There's no cabin underneath the cockpit that I can tell. I think that's right, isn't it, Hugo? I don't think that it did have a.
Yeah, I'm ashamed to say I didn't spend a night on board, but that might well explain why.
Yeah, no, just the one open plan cabin, but again, for a couple, it would be really comfortable. And I think the performance you get with those diesels would be great for the sorts of stuff that people want to use these style of boats for these days, getting out to the beach, crossing the Solent or going a bit further afield, because again, it would have a decent range on it, because it was designed to sort of get out to the sports fishing spots in the States, and they want to do that very quickly and very comfortably. So it is a left field choice, but it just struck me that there's a lot of stuff about that boat that people are looking for in modern boats, and it sort of has them built in this pretty quirky, it had to be said, package. But I was always drawn to it, and it jumped out at me again from the classifieds. And the particular one I found is a 2004 boat, I think, on for 95 grand, full set of Raymarine nav equipment, T-call over, bow thruster, 400 hours on the engine. I think that would give you many, many, many happy hours at sea, and you'd get plenty of interest when you pull into a marina as well.
You certainly would, that, because it was always a great looking machine, that big sort of whaleback shear, and quite kind of nice to have something that people will recognise the Sunseeker bit, but probably have no idea about the model. And
yeah, I'd wager there's a fair few sort of people new to boating who'd have no idea that Sunseeker ever built a boat like that.
I wonder how many they actually ended up building. I think it's pretty small numbers, isn't it?
Yeah, I couldn't actually find that figure myself, but every advert says, rare, not many around. So I'd be interested to know the exact figure, but I don't think it flew off the shelves at the time. No.
Well, no, back then, the idea of having a triple petrol outboard powered 37-foot center console sports fishing boat anywhere other than the States was just completely
ludicrous, didn't it? And now everyone's doing it. So it was ahead of its time, I think. But ballsy move.
They should have a crack now. Maybe they do a better job this time around.
They've got the Hawk. They've got one outboard powered performance boat, but why not?
I mean, anyone fishing from that.
No, certainly not.
My only criticism of that sport.
There's plenty of criticism, Nick. Don't worry. I mean, it's not for everybody, but it caught my eye.
My issue with it, because it's about a 37-foot boat overall, I think.
It's 40 feet. It's just shy of 40 feet in total.
Yeah, so it's a pretty big boat. I did look at one once, and I really liked it. And I agree with you that there's a lot of interesting. The fact it's like a center console style, the fact it's got that forward seating area is all good. The only thing I found, and it depends how you use the boat, of course. If you're just using it as a day boat and very occasional weekender, then it probably wouldn't matter. But for me, the thing that lets it down a little bit, particularly for a boat of that size, is you've got the fixed double bed inside, which is great. Having a fixed bed is superb. You leave the bed made up, you don't have to keep putting your bedding away and everything. But you're left, if I remember rightly, with a tiny little sofa that will just about squeeze two people onto, and you can sit on your sofa and look at your bed. That's about all you can do in the cabin.
Yeah. I think it's a fair weather boat. You can completely enclose the sort of forward part of that cockpit. I'm not sure if you could do that aft, but it had the framework around the helm, and it also had an optional hard T-top, I should say. So you could put covers around that outdoor dinette. But again, if the weather's really bad, if it's raining and it's cold and windy, you're going to be sat up there in your coat, and it's not going to feel particularly cozy. So yeah, not great if you get caught out for a few days in bad weather. And yeah, you're going to be lying on your bed watching your iPad. But just one of the sacrifices you have to make with that boat, I think.
It just depends what you want from the boat at the end of the day. If you want a day boat that you can spend the occasional night on, it's perfect. But I really like the whole idea of being able to, especially on a boat of that size, I want something where I can think, okay, we're going to go away for a week. We're going to go up to from Torquay, perhaps up to Poole, and then up to the Solent, and then back down again. And it's just something really nice of an evening when the sun goes down, to be able to drop into the cabin and make yourself a drink and sprawl out, and maybe put the TV on if you want to, or whatever you want to do, and then still have that separate bedroom. And that's, for me, where that boat would fall short. But that's not a criticism so much as a personal choice thing. It wouldn't work for my type of boating, but I can understand why it would work for somebody else.
I can remember is that it's got a live bait well, so you can actually carry around a large tank full of sand eels to catch your giant bass, or preferably massive marlin. And you can't be doing that with your cranky 41.
Nor would I want to.
It's a proper fishing boat, don't you know?
Yeah.
People say to me about mine, I say, do you fish off it? And I say, God, no. It's the last thing in the world I want to do with it.
That is true. Once you've had one mackerel flapping about covering your boat in scales, you never want any more.
Nasty, nasty business. No, I prefer my fish already battered.
Fair play. It was in hindsight a ballsy move to take on the Americans at what they do best from Sunseeker. And I read the Power and Motor Yacht review as well. Obviously, they're an American-based magazine, and they weren't as sniffy about it as I thought they would be. They refer to it as a bit of a soft sports fisher, I think. But the hardcore stuff over there is just ludicrously focused on fishing. I think this strikes a reasonable balance, and I don't think Sunseeker were ever going to try and sort of take on Viking and the likes over there. But a decent attempt, and it makes for a very quirky entry on the second-hand market now, in my opinion.
The most expensive sea bass you're ever going to catch.
Yeah. Well, talking of quirky, maybe we should move on to our wildcard choices. Nick, would you like to explain what you've chosen for this one?
Well, I've chosen a Princess 455. Now, I've always loved the old classic princesses, like the original Princess 45 that came out in the mid-80s. Those boats are getting pretty old now. I think that boat ceased production in about 1990, I think in 91, so the very last one, 91. But they replaced that boat with a 455, and it was just like the 45 in terms of the layout, the size, and everything that the 45 did, but just a little bit more modern. So they just rounded it off a little bit, and I think it got the transom door, it got the integral bathing platform, and it just lifted it a bit, sort of made it a bit more current. But it still had all the magic of that 45. And in fact, there was a 470 as well, when the 470 was a 455 with an extended bathing platform, so you could put a tender on it instead of on davits. But I did come across a 455 for sale. Now, the reason I think it's a slightly brave choice is because I'm not remotely mechanically minded, and if anything goes wrong, I have to pay someone else to fix it. And so taking on a boat that is now kind of 30 years old plus, and a big boat at that, would be brave. But I do think that for under £100,000, it's so much boat. It's a fantastic hull. It's slightly old school in as much as they haven't tried to cram as many cabins as possible. So you get a nice big saloon. And then when you go forward and down, the galley is down on the lower deck. And then you had the option of either having a master cabin forward and then two further cabins, one to port and one to starboard. But you could lose the port cabin, which was ahead of the galley, and you could have a dinette there. And that made a really nice, effectively like a kitchen diner. So a lovely place in the morning to have a bit of breakfast before you emerge, or of an evening to go and have a coffee, and a separate sort of social area on the boat. Big flybridge, great seakeeping, shaft drive engines. Well, the biggest engines, you're knocking on the door of 30 knots, so very easy 20 knot cruising. I just think for under 100 grand, if you are prepared to take on the inevitable risk of an older boat, and it's the same for any boat on the water, the older it gets, you know, the more chance there are typically. I mean, there's, you know, variations to that in terms of how well it's been maintained and all those kinds of things. But if you're prepared to take that on, and ultimately they are very simple engines back in those days, you know, it was cable controls to alter the throttles and the gears. It wasn't all electronics like it is now. So they are pretty straightforward and unstressed. They're great big bus engines, really, compared with modern boats. So they are at least pretty simple. But I just think it's a huge amount of boat for the money. It's a great sea boat. There's still a good looking boat. The accommodation is fantastic. And as I say, if you're prepared to take on that sort of older boat gamble, it would be an amazing boat for under 100 grand.
For the man who was giving me grief for looking at a boat that's not yet 20 years old, suddenly he comes out.
Yeah, we were being sensible then.
Thing.
We were being sensible. Not anymore. So your choice, Hugo.
Actually, sorry, I think we might leave Hugo to last, because his is the wildest of wild cards. So we'll let him take the last spot. And as we're talking about buying older boats, I actually think it's a very good time for me to come in with my wild card, because I have chosen a 1978 Bertram 31, which is undoubtedly iconic, wonderful, beautiful boat. But you would immediately run a mile, you know, you'd think, buying a boat at that age. But the beauty of this one is that it's been re-engined with a pair of modern 315 horsepower Yanmars. It was taken back to the bare hull in 2010, rewired, replumbed, new full tank, custom teak interior, redesigned flybridge with a full suite of modern Garmin instruments, radar, chart plotter, etc. They even added some spray rails to it, because the 31 had a Ray Hunt hull, the deep V, iconic Raymond Hunt hull, but it was known to be a little bit wet in rougher waters. So they've even added some spray rails. So they sort of solved the one ride issue that the Bertram 31 had. So you won't get absolutely soaked when you're ploughing along in it. So, you know, they've improved a boat that was very difficult to improve on. It's 97,479 is the price. The only slight snag is that it's in America, so you'd have to get it back or move to America. But for me, that's a small price to pay to own a Bertram 31 that's basically been restored to new with modern engines.
I've had a little look at this one, Jack, and I can't help saying that in amongst all this magnificent new refit, they still haven't bothered to actually fit any seats in the cockpit.
Well, no, because you're supposed to be standing fishing, aren't you? You know, it's not about relaxing. It's about going to sea and catching your dinner. It's not about
it's got a massive tuna tower and outriggers, and what are you going to do with that?
Look extremely cool. Imagine that pulling into Yarmouth. I mean, you're going to really look like you know what you're doing, even if you don't.
Yeah, when you pull up your 4-inch mackerel on the end of your tuna tower, you're going to look like Captain Pugwash up there. It might fall over.
I've got a bit of a sports fisher theme going on with these two choices. I don't know what it is. Something's come over me. Something's come over me. But I take your point. But the beauty of having that completely bare deck is you can just fill it with whatever freestanding furniture you want. Table, sun loungers, card table, whatever you want. Stick it in there.
Yeah, that's going to look absolutely right in the back of a Bertram 31.
Yeah, get a nice wooden one.
Sun loungers and, God, old Jack Hemingway in the corner here.
I'm sorry, it's the romantic in me. But I think
it's a fine-looking hull, that, and I have a sneaking admiration for it, even if it is a completely ridiculous choice.
It's a wild card. What can I say? But I think if you're going to buy one of these boats, and it's a pretty good bet given the work that's been done there. It's not completely ridiculous. You know, it's not got a hull made of cheese and it hasn't got ancient engines. It's, you know, they've made a good effort to. Yeah, it's even got a generator and air conditioning. I mean, what more do you want?
Just some seats might be nice.
Some seats might be nice. Yeah. Well, you know, easily sorted.
You could probably buy a couple of damn B&Q, stick them in the back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, look the part. Come on then, Hugo. Hit us with yours. What's your wild card?
Well, I've just thought a little bit laterally about this, but I have to say, I don't think it's really that wild at all. In fact, I'd really considered making this my first choice. And that is, rather than spending my 100 grand on my very own boat, why not take £100,000 share in a partnership? So there are these networks around, like there's the Yacht Share Network, which sets up syndicates for owning boats. So you sort of buy into one of these syndicates, an existing boat, you own a share of the boat, and that can be anything from a half share to a sort of eighth share, and use that time. And I've had a little look just to see what I could find. And for exactly £99,000, I found myself a third share in a 2013 Fairline Squadron 42 based in Italy. And as a third share, that would give you approximately sort of 16 weeks per year, more or less 100 nights on board. And let's face it, you know, how many of us have managed to spend anything like that amount of time on our own boats? So this way, you could have a third share in a really nice, modern, prestige 42-foot flybridge cruiser based in a lovely marina in Italy, easily accessible by airport from the UK. You would have as much time on it as realistically you're ever likely to be able to spend. In effect, it is your boat. You own your third share of it. It's not like you're renting it or some strange timeshare arrangement. You own that third of the boat. It's easy to buy and sell. You can sell your share through this Yacht Share Network. So it's no harder work. In fact, it's actually less hassle because the boat is either maintained professionally or by the three of you who own shares in it. There's a very neat structure to it all, both in terms of legally and financially and how it's managed. This particular one, they say the running costs are about £18,000 a year, which again, because effectively you're only paying a third of the running cost. You know, if you're having to pay for your own berth in the Mediterranean, Italy, France, wherever it is, you're probably going to be paying that anyway alone just to berth your boat, let alone insurance and running costs and servicing and everything else. So this way you get the use of a modern boat in a fantastic location for a third of the price. And, you know, one of those 2013 boats is about £300,000 now. So you effectively get all the use of a modern boat in a fantastic location, a third of the hassle, a third of the costs. What's not to like?
Well, that's a good question. When you put it like that, it all sounds too good to be true. Why isn't everybody buying a boat this way? You know, what are the downsides?
Well, I mean, not many is the simple answer. You have to be a little bit more organized about things, because what you can't do is jump on it at the last minute. You know, there are three of you who are wanting to use it. Inevitably, there's likely to be greater demand to use it during the summer months. But, you know, that's the advantage of buying like a third share. You know, that £100,000, you could buy like a sixth share of a 60, 70 footer and have a really fantastic luxury experience. But that would be compromising when you could use it. You'd obviously have fewer weeks, and the algorithm there's a website that essentially allocates what weeks you get. So you all sort of put forward what you like to get and which are the sort of premium weeks and which are the sort of shoulder season and off season. So it works out a fair split between the different owners of the boat. But in this case, because you own a third of it rather than a sixth or an eighth or anything like that, the chances are you're going to get pretty close to the weeks you want. And you can hopefully again then get sort of 2 or 3 weeks together. Again, if you have a smaller share, you might only get sort of 1 week at a time, and then it'd be somebody else's turn. Otherwise, you're all fighting for the same sort of premium weeks. But if there's only 3 of you dividing it up, the chances are you probably can get 2 or 3 weeks at a stretch, really go on a lovely cruise along the Italian coast down to the south of Italy, or over to France or Sardinia or Corsica. That's all within easy reach of a couple of weeks cruising from where it's based. So yeah, it's not quite like owning a boat. Obviously, if you want to make changes to it, you've got to discuss that with the 2 other people and agree a budget. They try to leave enough weeks in the schedule so that it's not sort of out of action. If it needs repairing or servicing, there should be enough time to make sure that's possible. And they have a very clever system whereby your sort of personal belongings, they take off the boat and store somewhere locally on site. And by the time you arrive, all your belongings have been moved on, all the other owners have been moved off. So effectively, when you're on board the boat, it looks and feels like your boat, and you really don't need to know that anybody else has anything to do with it other than the occasional conversation to agree, whether you're going to buy a new tender for it this year or when you're going to get it serviced. But again, you're only paying a half of any of those costs. So if you want to fit a new tender to it, it's a third of the cost rather than paying full whack for it. So yeah, it's not quite the same as owning your own boat. There is a certain joy in all that fiddling and getting it exactly how you want. But if you look more at the use you get out of it and the experience you get out of it, there are very few compromises.
Yeah, and I'd say for plenty of people, certainly keep their boats abroad, the idea of just stepping off with your bag and leaving and knowing that someone else is going to clean it, fuel it, make sure everything's okay. And likewise, when you arrive, it's ready to go. My parents keep their boat abroad, and there's always that scary moment where you think you're going to arrive and there's a major issue. So you spend that week is then spent fixing it rather than using the boat. Whereas you'd hope if you're in a yacht share where someone is, keeping a real close eye on the boat and maintaining it really closely, then you just get a full week or 2 weeks or whatever it may be of use. And I suppose if you're friends with the people in the share, then it doesn't even matter if you overlap and you sort of make a big, family or group holiday of it as well.
Yeah, I think that's the case. And, there's a lot to be said for a boat being used. One of the problems of keeping a boat abroad is that it gets left untouched for months at a time. And then there usually is a little bit of snagging by the time you get there. This one is being used more regularly, which on the whole tends to be better for things like engines, which don't particularly like being left unused. But yeah, you're right that this one has a professional guardianage arrangement. There is somebody on site locally who cleans it, looks an eye on it, turns it over for the next user, and then sorts it out if there is a problem in between. So yeah, I think as a way of keeping a boat abroad without either the sort of financial or emotional or time commitment, it makes a lot of sense.
What's your take on it, Nick? I mean, knowing the sort of boat owner you are, I know you get such a kick from all the fiddling and the fettling and just going down and sitting on your boat whenever you want and it's local. But does this sort of thing appeal to you in the slightest, or would you always want to have full ownership of your own boat?
I think it's one of those things that logically makes a huge amount of sense. But I don't think owning a boat is ever a logical thing. I think it's an emotive thing. And I can see the point to it. I can see why somebody would do it completely. But I don't think it would work for me. I think that I'm probably a little bit too OCD. So, I'd go down and think, well, that shouldn't be left right. That's not right. I think there'd be a bit of that going on. I think that I quite enjoy, I suppose it's different because the boat's abroad, that's another aspect to it, but I quite enjoy sometimes it's a sunny Sunday and there's not much going on, and I'll just go down to the boat and have a bit of a potter about and give it a clean and sort things out. And then of course you could go down and clean your boat down in Italy, but it would just feel a bit odd. But then I guess that's true if you keep own a boat outright and keep it abroad. I don't know. I think it does make a lot of logical sense. I just think it's not the same ultimately as owning your own boat and knowing it's yours. And I think that pride of ownership and that ability to potter and that thought, well, I really fancy putting, so, you know, a nice stereo system in and having speakers in the cockpit, and somebody else might think, well, I don't want speakers in the cockpit on our boat. I think they look ugly, you know, and this sort of thing. You know, you don't have those. You don't have to have those conversations. You don't have to, you know, if you want to wrap it and put a, you know, a bright pink wrap on it or something like that, do something that's a bit out there. You can do. You don't have to consult anybody else.
Look perfect on your nice princess, a nice bright pink wrap.
That's possibly a slightly extreme example, but you take my point that, you know, there is limitations to it. There's bound to be limitations to it, and I just don't think I want those limitations.
I can see where you're coming from. I think in the UK, I'd probably agree with you that I'd be either prepared to spend more or have a, you know, slightly older boat or slightly smaller boat for the convenience of being able to jump on it at the last minute. But I think, you know, when it's abroad anyway, you kind of have to plan things a bit further in advance anyway. You've got the added hassle of not being able to get to it and not being able to look after it at the drop of a hat. So in that situation, the idea of a fully maintained boat without the cost actually really appeals to me, both in terms of the finance and in terms of the hassle, you know, knowing that somebody else is keeping an eye on it when you're not able to.
Yeah, it's not without merit. I totally agree. It's not without merit, and I could see it being something that I would consider. I'm not sure I could see it being something I'd actually ever do.
I don't think they want to share with you anyway, Nick, to be honest.
I don't blame you. It's one of my habits. You won't want to go on a boat after me.
Well, I mean, Hugo certainly was a wild card choice, but I think it sparked a good bit of conversation, and it's certainly an interesting concept that maybe the people watching aren't aware of, that this is even a thing. So, you know, you can easily Google the yacht sharing thing and have a close look for yourself. But it is an interesting concept and a different way of getting into boating. And I think on that note, we can probably call it a day for this video. Thank you very much for your input, gentlemen. We got there in the end with another one of these, and we will look to do more. It shouldn't be too hard to organise logistically, even if we are a bit freer next year. But yeah, if you find them of value, please do leave us some comments below. And any boats that we've mentioned in this video, I'll try and put links to in the description, so you can watch our reviews. And Nick's done a few tours of the boats that we've noted, that we've mentioned as well. So I'll make sure I add them as well. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.